Crazy Talks with Wise People. Once again, with Mary Angela Tuck from our studio here in Scotland. Our guest for today is from Melbourne, Australia. And let me give you a little bit of his background before we proceed with the interview. Um, his name is Jeremy Holt. He grew up in Durban, South Africa during the turbulent apartheid era during the 60s and counterculture 70s. For 40 years, he had worked in various educational communities across the globe in South Africa, Ireland, China, and Australia as a teacher, mentor, lecturer, sports coach, residential leader, and educational consultant. So apart from guarding against his life narrative, becoming an idiot's tale, according to him, he nurtured a family of love along with an admixture of literature, philosophy, writing, rugby, and swimming. He is now based in Hidden Valley, north of Melbourne, Australia, where his search for meaning continues. Minha luta continua. I remain committed, according to him. He remains committed to challenging himself and those around him to face the complexities of life with humaneness, compassion, and hope. And dare to say, audacity. Very sound principle in life. It seems like you will give us a ray of hope today. Let's all welcome Jeremy Holt. He is also an indie author.
Cheers.
Yes.
Cheers. Thank you very much for that welcome. Yeah, look, I'm not sure whether I'll be able to give you too many insights or too much inspiration, but I'll certainly try my best to do that. And as the Portuguese say, minha luta continua. Hey, my struggle continues. The struggle for meaning continues. It's ongoing. It doesn't stop.
So you mean you have not yet found the meaning of life until now?
No, I think I don't think I found any answers, but I think I've learned how to ask better questions.
I think you found the meaning of your life. It's just that you are into this journey of continuous growth because what I've learned from many people, from those that I've met previously, is that the more you know, the more you don't know. I think that's you. You've known so much.
Yeah,
You
look,
know
I
so
think
much. And that's why you
I
feel
think
like
that's kind
you
of
are not yet full. Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's
I
you.
think that sort of echoes very much Socrates' idea is that knowledge begins from a point of ignorance, and it's sort of being able to acknowledge your ignorance or your lack of understanding that you're at a point to kind of grow. And that growth comes through a kind of dialectic of doubt and belief. It's a kind
Yeah.
of
Well, yeah,
constant exchange between the two.
constant feeling of ignorance. That's
Yeah.
actually that is actually a sign of wisdom. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, yeah.
Doesn't feel like it sometimes.
Well, that's it. I've met a lot of
Mm.
people. People are so accomplished in life. They are so unassuming, and that's you. I think that's
Mm.
you. They're so unassuming. So yeah, you're an indie
Mm.
writer. This is what attracted me actually, and the reason why I wanted to interview you is because you're an indie writer. And
Cool.
yeah, um, when did you first realize you wanted to be an indie writer?
The truth is, I actually don't think I set out to be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
There was no like lightning bolt
Mm-hmm.
moment or this is what I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I've spent over 4 decades studying and teaching literature. I mean, my background is teaching and
Ah,
reading and literature.
Mm,
across genres. I suppose I was always in awe of those who could use words, explore ideas
mm,
and stories,
mm,
and to crack open something deep within,
mm,
and how they shape and misshape
mm,
um, their views.
mm,
But the idea of writing itself, I think I only came to it on a tangent.
mm,
And I would suggest too that I don't think I ever thought about writing before. I don't think I could have done any writing before 10 years ago, probably. I don't think I was mature enough to do that writing. But a couple of things happened, and it might sort of take you into the question about what inspired my first book.
mm,
Uh, um, and I think that was really the catalyst for the writing, came through um, my son, actually, surprisingly.
mm,
And it's a kind of funny story, which I can just give you a brief background to. In 2016, my youngest son, he
mm,
was 11 at the time, he's complaining, he was having a whinge at home about being bored and not having anything to do. And his mother, who was originally from Rhodesia, she grew up in Rhodesia,
mm,
she told him about her life in Rhodesia, about the Bush War, about particularly the Hunyani story. I don't know if you know anything about the Hunyani story, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Um, and about the actual context of living in Rhodesia back in the 1960s and 70s,
mm,
and sort of challenged him to write a story based on that. So he came back with this epic tale now about twin brothers surviving a plane crash and escaping through the African bush. Now, the Unyani atrocity during the war was very much a commercial airliner that was shot down by um, insurgents during the war.
mm,
The plane crashed, was shot down by a SAM 7 missile. It crashed.
mm.
The survivors on the ground were then murdered by
Oh,
another group of insurgents. That
oh,
was in 1978. Now, I remember that because I was at school at the time.
mm,
So I have a kind of vague recollection of that. But he based his story on that incident.
mm,
And when he handed the story to my wife, she kind of threw it over to me, a kind of hospital pass, if you want, because
mm,
I was the English teacher. She said, "Oh, you have to edit this and check it out." So,
mm,
and when I read it, there was something in the story that kind of stuck in my head. I thought that it stirred something in me,
mm,
and I won't lie, I actually stole his idea. So that was the catalyst to my writing. It was a single experience of reading a short story written by my son at the age of 11.
ah,
And then, of course, he's never let me forget that. He keeps sort of
mm,
reminding me that he was the inspiration for my writing. So
mm,
what began as a spark from his imagination,
mm,
it kind of lit something deeper within me.
yeah,
And the backdrop, the Rhodesia, the Bush War, the
mm,
Unyani atrocity was part of my own story.
mm,
I served in the South African military during the time of the South African Bush War in the
mm,
70s.
mm,
So the ghosts of that time were always with me.
mm,
And then the book became a way of wrestling with memory, with conscience, with the kinds of stories that haunt a country and that haunt people long after they've actually occurred. Um, and ultimately, I think the material, it chose me. I didn't choose it.
mm,
I wasn't really looking to write at the time, but I think there's something in his story that I um, felt more like a sacred obligation than a choice. It was something that found me. It was a tale that had to be told before it told itself through someone else. And really, that was the catalyst for my writing and the inspiration for the first book that I wrote, Everything That Stands,
mm.
which I don't know whether you've read, but there it is,
Oh,
still
let me
there.
see it. May I see the cover?
Can you see it?
Everything that
Yeah.
stands. Oh,
Yeah.
tell us about that book. Everything That Stands. Tell us about that book.
Well, in effect, it's based during the Rhodesian War.
The Say
It's
that again.
set in the
Rhodesian War.
it's set in the Rhodesian War, 1970. So it takes its lead from a particular incident in 1978.
Mm,
A commercial airline was traveling from Kariba to Salisbury with
mm,
a group of tourists who'd be coming back from holiday.
mm,
Um, it was shot down by a SAM 7 missile by a group of insurgents.
mm,
The airplane crashed. There were 55, 60 people on board.
mm,
Most of them were killed
mm,
when it crash landed. There were about 18 survivors. Eight of them went off to kind of look for help. Another group of insurgents arrived on the ground and murdered the survivors.
mm,
So the context for the story was I wrote of twin brothers who survived the crash, survived the massacre, and then have to negotiate their way through the bush to escape. Obviously,
mm,
they encounter wild animals and all sorts of things, and they have a group of insurgents chasing them.
mm,
But the story became very much for me an exploration of memory, of conscience, of choice when you're confronted with situations that kind of throw you into the cauldron of war. You're these two young men um, confronting those particular issues at that time. And
mm,
they encounter all kinds of characters and different animals that shift their perspective. So in some ways, the African bush becomes a sort of liminal space, if you want, for exploring meaning.
mm,
What's it all about? What
mm,
yeah, and how do we make meaning uh, in these sorts of environments? Well, I mean, in some ways, the connections for me are quite stark now. If we look at our world, the fragmented, dislocated nature of the world we live in
yeah.
now,
Mm,
the geopolitics,
mm,
the sort of the global specters of war.
mm, mm.
How do we make meaning? How do we find meaning
How do you
when
find
we're
meaning? Yeah.
confronted with this
Mm-hmm,
this
mm-hmm.
dislocation and fragmentation?
Right, right. Mm-hmm,
So that was the kind of context, I suppose,
mm-hmm.
for this book.
For that
Um,
book, yeah. So it's a
yeah, it took me
juxtaposition.
it took me 7 years to write this.
Ah, that must be well thought of.
Um,
It's a juxtaposition of real life, right? Real life and
yeah,
literature. Yeah.
uh, it's in some ways it's a deeper exploration of what has now become a doctoral study. So I'm busy doing a
Mm,
doctorate. In
mm.
some ways, the book is my PhD is an extension of the novel, and
Ah,
it's looking at what I would call metamodern theopoetics. So it's a search for the sacred. It's a search for understanding what, in terms of what I suppose Frankel would have spoken about, search for meaning within the context of the Holocaust. Mine is a search for meaning within the Rhodesian bush, which I think we can kind of use as a metaphor for our current environment in terms of trying to understand uh, who we are as people, uh, and what and how we can actually make sense of our world and how we can make contributions to making it a better place, I suppose.
oh, yes, very
Um,
nice. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So they'd better read that. I think that's very interesting. So it's literature depicting real life. Very nice.
Yes,
Mm,
yes,
mm,
it is that, but I think it's more than that. I think
mm.
it steps beyond the reality of the war to engage with more with there's quite a lot of philosophy. There's quite a lot of
A lot of philosophy,
I
yes.
wouldn't say religion. I would say more kind of spiritual
Yeah,
search for
spiritual
meaning, a
search.
sense of the
Yeah.
sacred.
Mm,
Mm.
mm.
And I've
So,
written a
so you
sequel, by
already
the
have.
way. The sequel is written.
Mm-hmm,
As I was saying, the sequel is written.
mm-hmm,
It's drafted. I've written a sequel, and it was always going to be part of a trilogy. So there's a kind of arc for three books which I'm
Mm.
still working on. But I've had to put a pause on that because of the doctorate.
What's the most surprising thing you've learned while writing that book?
Yeah, it's a tough question. Um, I think I've learned that memory isn't linear.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Truth itself is not static.
Mm-hmm.
What we remember shifts with who we're becoming, and we're always in a process of becoming. We're never the finished object. We're
Yeah.
always
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
we're provisional. We're provisional beings living in an evolutionary world.
Mm-hmm.
So our understanding of truth is not static,
Mm-hmm.
nor is memory. The way we remember things, we do disremember and unremember and re-remember, and depending on where we are, we re-remember things differently. And in some ways, the book explores all those things, that the non-linear nature of memory and the non-static nature of truth, I think, are central.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay, so you've mentioned about.
I suppose writing is,
Mm,
yeah, I was going to say, writing has taught me, I think,
mm,
uh, to honor the complexity of contradiction,
mm,
to sit with paradox,
mm,
and
mm,
to
mm,
find faith not in certainty, but in doubt, and
mm,
in being present and living in the tension of those contradictions.
mm.
I suppose I
Um,
could say the blank page is never truly blank. It's kind of crowded with
yeah,
ghosts, with longings and unfinished conversations. So I
unfinished
think that's one of the key
conversations.
things I've learned.
Mm,
Does
yeah.
that kind of make sense?
Yes. You were talking about
Mm,
the dynamism of life, the
mm,
perspective being subjective, recall.
yeah.
You've talked about paradoxes. You've talked about
Mm,
evolution of human life and even
yeah.
human psychology. Well, everything evolves because there is no such a thing as permanent in this world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that's kind of that idea is an interconnected idea, is it? It's not just a kind of. I mean, you'll find that in your Eastern philosophies as well, wouldn't you? It's the
Mhm,
sense of flux,
mhm,
that things are not static. Um, and I mean, in my PhD, I'm looking at an area which is called the metamodern, which in some ways is a sensibility that comes after, but it also transcends the modern and the postmodern. It's kind of
mhm,
suggesting that it is only through interconnection, through flux, through change, through
mhm,
living with those tensions that
mhm,
we can get a sense of the understanding of and who we and what we are in relation, not just to other human beings, but in terms of our environment. And I mean, I think societally we're facing what is called the meta crisis.
mhm,
It's a
mhm,
series of interconnected crises. So it's not just climate change, but it's also societal change. It's also consciousness change. Uh, um, and it's requiring new ways of thinking, new ways of being. I think if we're going to get out of this mess, we've
mhm.
got to actually start thinking beyond the limitations of where we've been thinking and
Yeah.
feeling. And I think feeling
Mm,
is part of that process.
mm. Yeah. So
Is that,
while you were writing your book, you said you wrote your
mm,
book for 7 years.
yeah.
Okay. Did you rewrite some parts of it?
Oh,
Because
look, the
because you know
process, the process of
yeah.
re-editing.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm, mm.
it was re-edited many times.
Many times.
Yeah, I had. I was fortunate that
I
I had
know
a
that.
group of reliable
Mm,
beta readers
mm,
who held me to account.
mm.
So, for example, when I first wrote this, it began as a short story. I'll be honest; it was like
Ah,
50
it
pages
began as a
long, and
short
then
story. Ah.
yeah, and then people said to me, "Oh, there's not enough in this. You got to give us more." And I was okay. We'll
Mm-hmm.
expand this.
Mm-hmm.
And then even there, they were saying, "Oh, you're writing about the context of the um, the conflict in Rhodesia, you need to kind of bring in a multiplicity of perspective. You need to look at the views of the other side, not just a kind of narrow white European perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And that became a kind of thing. Yeah, I need to actually broaden my understanding of this conflict by including these voices and bringing in the kind of the rhythms of the natural world
Mm-hmm.
and looking at those sorts of things. So it kind of expanded, and then at some point I read a number of articles on theopoetics and the metamodern. So it then became a kind of search to understand the sacred, and then it became looking at the whole provisionality of in terms of the nature of things.
Mm-hmm.
So it became a kind of deeply philosophical exploration
Mm-hmm.
of meaning. And in the book, there's a series of what I would call Socratic dialogues, sort of
Uh-huh.
culminating in a Socratic dialogue with himself, but it's done in metaphorically as a I don't know. Are you familiar with the work of William Blake, the poet
Yeah.
William Blake?
Yeah. I
He wrote
I
a
like
poem called
him.
The
He's one
Tiger.
of my favorite authors.
Yeah, he
Mm.
wrote he wrote a poem called The Tiger, but in
Mm-hmm.
my book, it's not the tiger because it's in Africa, it's the leopard. He has this encounter with the leopard, which
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
effect is an
Mm-mm-mm-mm-mm.
open-ended conversation with the divine in a sense. So
Yeah.
the book touches on elements of magical realism too. So it's not just reality itself. It
It
moves
looks
beyond
like
that
it
into
looks like a very interesting book to read. You being a
mm,
literature teacher, I think
mm.
you that must be a book with so much depth into it.
Look, I'd like to think it is. I think it
Like to
touches
think
on a whole range
it.
of writers and texts. In fact, in the index at the back,
Mm-hmm.
I've given a brief sort of summary of those books that influenced the writing of this book.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I believe in this concept that all books are in conversations with other books. They don't just kind of emerge in a
Mm.
vacuum. All books, all texts. I suppose in that sense, I'm a deconstructionist. I believe that they are interconnected and that they speak to one another. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, as I said, I've included a long list of references and influences uh, at the end of the book, acknowledging my reliance or my indebtedness to those writers that I've had conversations with
Yes, yes.
for many years. I used to joke with my students. I said, some of my friends are over 2,000 years old. And they were, well,
Mm.
what do you mean by that? They think I'm mad. I say, well,
Mm. Mm.
if I read Marcus Aurelius'
Mm.
meditations, I'm in
Mm.
conversation with Marcus Aurelius.
You're
And
right.
that book still resonates now. Because he's
Mm.
been dead for so long, that means nothing. And yeah, I mean, some of my great friends, like William Shakespeare, is another one.
Yes.
William Blake, they
Yes,
speak to
William
me now.
Blake. Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
so I'm part of that conversation as we are part of that conversation now. So
Mm.
we're kind of interconnected.
All right. If you were going to have
Mm.
coffee with someone of your 2000 years old or 5,000-year-old friends, who would you like to have coffee with today?
You know what? That's a tricky question. There's so much to choose from there. Look, I've got to say, it's probably it would probably be somebody like William Shakespeare, I reckon. Um, in fact, in my sequel to this, I have an imagined scene where he does have a conversation with William Shakespeare, and it's about Hamlet, which I think, to me, Hamlet is the greatest text that has been written. I know I'm pretty biased, but
Yes,
but
yes,
that's the way
yes.
I
I
kind of see it.
understand why. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the
Based.
sequel,
Mm-hmm.
the sequel to Everything That Stands,
Mm-hmm.
is called A Thousand Swords. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually a palimpsest of Hamlet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In some
Mm-hmm.
ways, it's a kind of my take on Hamlet,
Mm-hmm.
using
Well,
the same characters from Everything That Stands. So yeah, if I was to have a
reading,
conversation, it would be William Shakespeare.
yeah, reading Hamlet way back when I was not here, I
Mhm.
I wouldn't have this empathy, I didn't understand the essence of it. But living here in Scotland, passing through a lot of Hamlets, this story
Mm.
gave me more essence.
Mm.
Yeah.
I mean, look, who are some of the other? I mean, who would I include there? Probably William Blake. But you know what? I'm thinking of
I
writers
like
like
William Blake. Yeah.
mm, I'm thinking of James Coetzee, who's a great South African writer. He's won
Mm,
a number of prizes. Life and Times of Michael Kay, Disgrace, Dusklands.
mm,
Who else? And Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, which is a
The
great
Alchemist.
read.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Margaret Atwood.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and if I'm looking now at um, texts that have got spiritual depth, I'd kind of look at Ecclesiastes, the biblical text, which for me is one of the great books ever written.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've heard of a writer called Richard Rohr, wrote a book called Falling Upward,
Mm-hmm.
Spirituality for Two Parts of Life. Gunter Weber's book, I believe, I doubt. Anthony de
Mm-hmm.
Mello's Song of the Bird. And also, I'm a big fan of John Bradburn. You
Mm-hmm.
might not have heard, he's probably one of the most prolific poets ever to live. He was a mystic and a misfit who he lived in Rhodesia in a very hermetic lifestyle in a leper
Mm-hmm.
colony. He looked after a colony of lepers.
Mm-hmm.
During during the Zimbabwean war, he was actually murdered
Mm.
by insurgents as well. And
Oh,
in my third book, I'm going to address the John Bradburn story because I think it needs to be told
yeah.
in more detail within a kind of
Mm.
context of a novel. So I think if that answers your question, Angela, but
Yeah, 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 yes, I
there's a
understand.
lot
You,
in terms of books.
yes,
Mm,
I understand, and I know where you're coming from because you're a literature teacher. Literature
mm,
was one of my favorite subjects.
mm.
I've gotten straight A, straight A plus in
Well, there you
literature.
go.
I love literature, and that's why
Mm,
I understand everything that you're saying. Very interesting.
hmm
One thing I've learned about literature teachers is that they've grown in depth because as they teach literature, they teach about life, history, culture, spirituality,
hmm
history, and they become very interesting people because of the insights that they gain out of teaching literature. And that you are is to me right now while I'm speaking with you. And I miss my literature teachers after I've spoken with you. I never had connected with any literature teacher in the past. I've been in the business world, I've been in the teaching world, leadership and stuff, and I never have had this luxury of time, having face to face,
mm,
talking about philosophies of life, the depth of it, the essence of it. And that's just refreshing, having spoken with you today. Now, another hypothetical question. If your book, this book, if your book
mm.
was a food, what would it be and why?
What if it was a food?
Yes.
Hey, that's a tricky question, isn't it? What kind of hmm? I probably would say I don't know what kind of food would I like. I'd relate it to maybe a fruit salad, eh?
Blue. Oh, okay.
A
Very
fruit
wise
salad,
answer.
maybe a touch of ice cream on top.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's
Fruit salad with ice cream topping. Delicious
yeah.
dessert. Uh-huh.
But it'd probably have it'd probably have a squeeze of lemon in there as well. Just
Mm-hmm.
make sure
Mm.
it's not overly sweet. It'd have a touch of um. I mean, look, the subject matter it deals with is can be quite weighty. I mean, is there
Mhm.
humor in it? Yes, of course.
There's
Is there
humor,
comedy? Yes. Is there
there's
tragedy?
history,
Yes.
there's tragedy.
So there's history, there's philosophy, there's spirituality. All
Yeah.
those things are in there. So
Mm.
it's a bit of an admixture of fruit. with
Mm-hmm.
a touch of acid and a touch of sweetness.
Yeah.
Mm.
That must be, is that published already? Is that out in the market?
It is out. Um, yeah, look, it's available on Amazon. It's available through my website as well. So it's there. Um, I wrote the book. It was first published in 2023, so it's been out
Mm-hmm.
for a year and a bit. Um, so yeah, don't ask me how it's going
Yeah, would you
because of
please
sales.
show us the cover again and invite our audience to buy your book? There
There it
you
is.
go. Mm. Everything.
And look, it's as I said, you can buy it off my website.
Mhm.
If you type my name in there with that, it'll come up.
Yeah,
Or
we
if you
can
go to
put
Amazon,
we
you
can
can
put
buy
the
it from
link
Amazon.
of Amazon and your website down below. So for those who are interested in reading your book, they can purchase it from there.
Yeah.
Just click that link.
Okay. Cool.
Mm.
Cool.
All right.
Um,
So would you please
yes.
uh yeah, invite our audience to purchase your book and leave your last words to them and before we go.
Okay. You didn't really want to ask me about writing routines or anything like that. Are you kind of happy? I mean, that's fine. I mean, yeah, I can. Look, yeah, look, if you're looking for a challenge,
Mm-hmm.
there it is. For me, I've this belief that stories should leave a resonance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you were to read this book, what would the takeaway be? Well, it would be to have that sense that you're not alone in your questioning, in your
Mm-hmm.
contradictions, in your searching. Um,
Mm-hmm.
even in fractured times, there's still words worth saying, and silence is worth listening to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't write to provide answers, so I don't think this book is going to provide you with any answers, but
Mm-hmm.
it's to hold open the space for you to maybe ask better questions. It was he? I don't know if you saw it. We have the text Shadowlands.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to think of his name now. He said, "Why do we read? Why do we write? To know that we are not alone, that we're
Mm-hmm.
connected to
Mm-hmm.
to the world, to each
Mm-hmm.
other."
Mm-hmm.
Um, his name will come to me probably when this interview's done.
Mm-hmm.
um, but if you find anything there, just in the questions that I've suggested,
Mm-hmm.
um, well, then I think that's a success for me. I'm content with that.
Thank you so much for joining us today,
Mm.
Jeremy Holt. Ladies and gentlemen, always remember to read. Leaders are good readers. Leaders read. So if you read, you leaders out there, if you want to add more substance to your reading, please purchase Jeremy's book. It's all available in Amazon and in his own website. We will be posting the links down below on this podcast. And all you need to do is just to click on that. How much is a copy?
Look, you can buy it on Kindle for probably $8 or $9. Hard
Eight.
copy, you're probably looking at about that's $30. That's Australian dollars.
All right.
What
Australian
for?
dollars. That's
But you can buy it. You can buy it anywhere though. You can buy it. I think it's available through not just the Australian networks on Amazon. You can probably
yes, on
buy it through a
Amazon.
whole
You
range
can
of different.
Jeremy Holt
Mm.
and just click the Amazon link below and yes, try it. I think
Okay.
it's very interesting. It is a concoction, I should say, concoction of many different flavors of life. That's what I would
Very
say.
much.
Yes. Thank you so
Very
much. I
much.
look forward to reading your book.
Yes.
Mm,
Thanks, Angela. I appreciate that.
I appreciate
All the
that
best.
too. All the best.
Okay.
Ciao.
All right. Bye now.
Bye. Bye. Thank you for
Bye.
watching. Thank you.